I've been doing analytics work for more years than I care to share. But most of the time I'm not doing any kind of data manipulation. Like I don't have access to change things on SQL Server, but kind of a recent thing I learned about as part of having to do some of this work is something called triggers. And now that I've started interacting with them, I find it very almost scary with how much they can actually impact, and like keeping up with everything that flows the where it is for me has been definitely a learning curve. So the scenario that has come up for me is using a third-party extension called WriteBack that I'm using for Tableau. And I've got dashboard users that I need to input information via a Tableau dashboard. And then I need to use that information to do some analysis on the back end. So that's got, a series of triggers associated with it. And I learned about trigger because I was like, I needed to trigger an action, and coincidentally had no idea this was something that you could do in SQL. And yet here we are. What are triggers? So triggers are special procedures that automatically execute in response to certain events on a particular table or view. But one trigger can fire off another trigger, can fire off another trigger, so it can be like this cascading series of things that are just happening in the background with no idea. So I feel like this adds like a layer of complexity that I'm not accustomed to. So thank you to the data engineers out in the world that have made this seamless for me. But now that I've discovered that they can impact the data in so many ways, let's talk about it. Things to know about triggers as an analyst. So number one, they can automatically modify data for you. Think of it like macros in Excel or something, but you're pushing a button. This is something that's more automated than that. So if this occurs, then this action will happen. And so those manual calculations can be automatically kicked off. Number two, triggers can actually insert rows. I didn't know this was happening. I ran into it. So it can do a wide variety of things. So you'll also want to make sure that your record counts aren't changing if you don't intend for them to. Number three, they can actually impact the performance. You don't know what's happening, but very large data sets, complex calculations, a series of things occurring, this can actually do some significant slowdowns in the background. But if you notice things are starting to degrade, you might want to go see what's happening. Number four, triggers can mask business logic. And so from how I understand it, a lot of times stored procedures are really how that we would feed the information that me as an analyst would use. So if something is happening there, I think that's the more normal place for like the data folks to actually go look for things, but triggers could be doing stuff. So it's like another layer of things that could be impacting the data space that you're operating in. So just being aware that these things happen in two places is nice. But I do think that the stored procedure is supposed to be the better place for these things to happen. And this can make root cause analysis, trying to figure out what's happening, very difficult for you and the team that actually does the ETL process. So let's talk about how to find those triggers in SQL. So this one is super basic. I've got a table called FoodAccessResearch. It talks about some food insecurity, and I want to add a created date when there are new records added. So you start by actually changing the table so that there is a field that you can populate. So in this case, I named it CreatedAt, and it's got a date time. Then you've got the actual part where you're doing the created trigger. So this is the name of the trigger. So TRG, just kind of rule of thumb, I like to keep things pretty clean. The TRG to me is trigger, and then this is what I've called it. So set created at. And then the on is the actual table that I want to impact. And then after insert, so there's a host of different things. I'll include a link in the description of like the different things that can trigger and the words that you might want to use for it. But I'll include that link. But after insert, and then we actually start the process of what we would like the trigger to be. So we want to update the table. We're going to set that new field, which isn't created yet. So I got a squiggle. Thank you for the alert here, SQL Server. And then we're going to set it to the get date. So today's date and time. And then that's going to come from the FoodAccessResearch and then do a join on this CensusTract, which is essentially the primary key on this set. On that record of inserted, these two match, throw in the today's date and time into this new field that I'm creating. So let's just go ahead and execute for fun. Boom. Now I have a trigger. This is a fresh database, and so it has nothing else. But how do you know that? So how to actually find triggers in SQL. So highlight, execute, and so now we have that trigger underscore set created at, when it was created, and last modification, because you can also modify a trigger. So this is a very simple example, just meant to show you how to find out if triggers are impacting your data. And then a very simple example of how to create a trigger. There are so many things that you can do you can trigger off of. And then remember, you can have a trigger action on top of a trigger action on top. So that cascade idea, it can get pretty complicated. And I was just adding the date and time for a single field, so we were adding the information to a single column, but you can do a whole bunch. You can have 20 columns altered. You can have auto calculations. There are so many different things you can do, so that can get just as complicated as your other SQL queries. Tips as a data analyst is to test, test, test. I cannot reiterate that enough. I have really convoluted the situation when I was really new and on a time crunch, essentially, that I've had to since clean up now that I understand what's happening a little bit better behind the scenes with that tool that I'm interacting with. And the next tip is to document. I know that we say that we want to be good at documentation, and I'm gonna get better at it, but this is one of those things that, like, if I don't document anything else, this is one of them. Because it's not something I'm normally working in as an analyst, but when I do, once it's fixed, like, I don't have to touch this for 6 months, and you understand what it's like to go back and look at your old code and you're like, wow, I wrote that, I'm smarter than I thought. Hit like if this was helpful to you. It really helps me out with the all-powerful YouTube algorithm, and happy analyzing.